Hi, everyone. It's such a joy to be with you all today as we talk about the many ways Catholic women and Catholic families have been impacted by church teaching. And can I say it is extremely daunting to follow so many wonderful panelists that I've heard today. As Jim said, for the last 2 years, I've served as the coordinator for the Equally Blessed Coalition. Equally Blessed is a coalition of 4 Catholic organizations committed to LGBT equality: Call to Action, Dignity USA, New Ways Ministries, and Fortunate Families. And today I'd like to talk to you a bit about the ways that lesbian, gay, bisexual, and trans Catholics and their loved ones have had a positive impact on the Catholic Church by engaging in relationships with people who disagree with them and sharing their stories. And I'd also like to talk a little bit about how all of us, regardless of our sexualities or gender identities, can take part in that important work today. As we all know, the Catholic Church's official approach on sexuality and gender has been deeply harmful for LGBT Catholics and their family members. One example of the pastoral harm caused by church teaching is the 1975 Vatican document, Persona Humana, which, while acquiescing to the fact that human sexuality comes from, in their words, a quote-unquote innate instinct, quickly follows that by saying that, quote, homosexual acts are intrinsically disordered and can in no case be approved of, unquote. Teachings like these, which on one hand agree that human sexuality is not a choice, while on the other hand calling any same-sex relationship inherently sinful, seem to imply that gay and lesbian people were created inherently flawed from birth, doomed to a life of either sinfulness or eternal solitude without the blessings of human intimacy. And of course, the Church's attack on LGBT people goes far beyond the reaches of Vatican documents. Just last month, many of us were horrified to hear Archbishop Kurtz, president of the USCCB, call the Supreme Court's marriage equality ruling, quote, a tragic error that harmed the common good and most vulnerable among us, unquote. These kinds of statements have a profoundly negative impact on the spiritual and emotional health of LGBT Catholics, especially children and young people who may be just coming to terms with their sexuality and who are confronted with rejection from their faith communities. And perhaps this is why some of the early warriors in the battle for LGBT equality in our church were the parents of LGBT children. Parents who, convinced of the innate holiness of their kids, have been some of the fiercest advocates for change in church teaching around issues of sexuality and gender identity. Equally Blessed Coalition partner Fortunate Families was particularly instrumental in having parents meet with bishops, sharing their stories, and offering the hierarchy insight into the ways that church teaching has real, sometimes life or death, impact on people's lives. The U.S. Bishop's pastoral letter, Always Our Children, which was written with the assistance of some of these parents, is one great example of how the Catholic Church has been positively impacted by these interactions. This letter encourages parents to accept their gay and lesbian children and states plainly that gay and lesbian people and their parents should feel welcome and loved in their church community. Now, Always Our Children was far from perfect, particularly in the way that it continued to insist on lifelong celibacy for gay and lesbian persons. However, the tone change that was present in that document was a breath of fresh air for people who'd been struggling with the Church's approach to sexuality and had not heard anything positive. And it made a real difference in those people's lives. And this is largely due to the parents who spoke out, agitated, and helped shape this document. And there's a lesson, I think, that we can learn from these parents. Telling our stories and telling the decision makers in our church how our families have been affected by the church's teachings on gender and sexuality are incredibly important. As has been said throughout this conference, the fact that church teaching is made by celibate men who may have never met anyone in a healthy same-sex relationship or knowingly met a transgender person is a massive problem. When you live such an isolated life, it can be easy for issues of sexuality and gender to seem like detached intellectual ideas and not real-life concerns of actual families. So in this system, where the people making the decisions about Catholic families are so far removed from the reality of family life, I think it can be revolutionary to, like the parents at Fortunate Families, honestly enter into relationship with members of our hierarchy and be willing to tell them about our family's experiences and needs. In the last few years, we've seen that as more bishops are getting to know people of diverse sexualities and gender identities, some of them are finding that they can no longer demonize those communities like they once did. For instance, I doubt that Pope Francis would have uttered his statement, "Who am I to judge?" when asked about gay priests, if he'd never had the privilege of meeting faithful, committed gay priests. The Synod on the Family's 2014 midterm report, which stated that, quote, homosexuals have gifts and qualities to offer the Christian community, is more evidence that change is possible, even slowly in very small ways from the Vatican. And of course, the final document of the Synod radically backtracked on that earlier positive language. But when we look at both of the documents together, I think it's clear that there's real debate going on and disagreement among the bishops and cardinals on how to approach issues of sexuality. That in itself is incredible and is evidence that many bishops and cardinals are no longer as isolated from their LGBT parishioners as they once were. In this time between 2014's Synod on the Family and the upcoming Synod in October, it's more important than ever that we make our stories known and make sure that the people who form church teaching about Catholic families come into contact with as many different kinds of Catholic families as possible. World Meeting of Families and Pope Francis's visit to the United States offers an important opportunity for LGBT Catholics and their family members to make sure that our stories are included in conversations about Catholic teaching on sexuality, marriage, parenting, and gender. And that's why the Equally Blessed Coalition is sending 22 people representing 12 families to World Meeting of Families, to make sure that the full diversity of Catholic families is included in this historic event. In our pilgrimage, we have trans and genderqueer people, married same-sex couples, and parents of LGBT people from diverse cultures and life experiences. And Marianne, who you heard from earlier in this forum, will actually be traveling as part of our pilgrims with her wife and her daughters. So their story, which you just heard, will be one of the many stories that we'll be bringing to World Meeting of Families. Another powerful story from our pilgrims is that of Karen Kelly and Debbie Carpenter, two moms who met when their daughters, Lauren and Sarah, fell in love and got married. Lauren and Sarah traveled to Equally Blessed's 2013 pilgrimage to World Youth Day in Rio de Janeiro, where they were able to tell their story and build relationships with Catholics from all over the world. Inspired by their daughter's witness, Karen and Debbie came to us asking to participate in the World Meeting of Families pilgrimage so that they, like their daughters, could speak up for their family. And like their daughters, Karen and Debbie have experienced hurt and pain as a result of our church's discrimination against LGBT people. Karen frequently tells the story of taking her family to Christmas Eve Mass at her home parish. The priest's homily was so homophobic that Sarah and Lauren had to walk out in the middle of it. Karen talks of the deep pain that was caused of having a joyous family event like Christmas become a moment of exclusion for her family. And this is a reminder that the church's stance on sexuality and gender can cause deep spiritual harm, both to LGBT Catholics and their family members, who can also feel that the doors of the church have been slammed in their faces. Recently, one of our pilgrims, Rosa Manriquez, told me a story that I thought was a beautiful example of what our pilgrimage is trying to achieve. She told me that she had this idea of inviting her local bishop to Thanksgiving dinner, not as a publicity stunt, but in realization that he, as a single man living alone, probably didn't have anywhere to go for a home-cooked meal. Maybe, she thought, he would like to be welcomed into a family on Thanksgiving. And maybe by being in her family, which includes her lesbian daughters, their partners, and children, he would come to understand that the church's teaching on sexuality has a real human impact on faithful, loving families like hers. Unfortunately, Rosa's bishop didn't take her up on her offer, which is clearly his loss. But I like to think this pilgrimage to World Meeting of Families is a way for our equally blessed pilgrims to share a meal with their extended Catholic family, get to know each other, and build relationships. It's as if the bishops have created a giant family dinner for the Catholic community, and our pilgrims are coming to the table, claiming their space as part of the Catholic family. The equally blessed World Meeting of Families pilgrimage is one exciting way that Catholics are sharing their stories and speaking out for equality. As our pilgrims embark on this journey, they will need your prayers and support, and there's a great list of ways that you can get involved in supporting the pilgrims at our website, which is wmf.equallyblessed.org. But in addition to supporting our pilgrims, I invite you to reflect on how you can share your own story to members of the hierarchy and to your fellow Catholics as people committed to equality in our church. I hope that you'll continue to be visible advocates for equality in your own parishes. Being visible, outspoken advocates for equality not only helps change the larger culture in the Catholic Church, it also provides immediate pastoral support to LGBT Catholics and their families who might be struggling to come out or who feel a lack of support from their fellow Catholics. As I hope you realize, you don't need to be any sort of expert on church doctrine to speak meaningfully about the way that the church's attack on LGBT people and on women hurts your family. The best way to speak powerfully about the impact of church teaching on Catholic families is to talk about how it's affected your own family or the family of someone you love. How have you seen the Spirit move in your family and in your relationships? How have you felt that the church failed to recognize the holiness of your family and your loved ones? Few of us are called to be experts on church doctrine, but we're all experts on our families. Finally, the vulnerability and honesty involved in building relationships with people who disagree with us is hard work. It's so important that we have a community of progressive, inclusive Catholics that we can turn to with our heartbreak and our frustration, and I think that's one reason why forums like this are so important. And it's also important to remember that this work can be the hardest for the people who've been most affected by homophobia and transphobia in our church. And that should be an inspiration to those of us who are allies to share your stories. Reach out to bishops, conservative Catholics, and others who may disagree with you, and let them know why you care about LGBT equality. These last few years have been a historic time for LGBT equality across the globe, largely as a result of the work of many lay Catholics in the US, Ireland, Mexico, Argentina, and other countries. This year, as we prepare for the 2015 Synod, We have an amazing opportunity to use this momentum to work towards equality in our church by sharing our stories, reaching out, and making sure that the experiences of real Catholic families are heard by the decision makers in our church. Thank you.